The intrinsic nature of nothing. Nothing, within a location of space, nothingness is the absence of all physical influences, forces, laws, and constants, which is inherently possible to include the absence of said space and time itself. Within our universe, it is a physical impossibility for there to exist a region where space and time cannot and does not exist. In this way, the universe is comprised of three attributes: space, time, and matter, all of which give rise to energy. In my 2 cents, we combine locality with temporality to define the abstract concept associated with space time. Space time is an objectively true property of our ontological universe. In my 2 cents, we abstract locality with temporality so as to build a construct from which we can hypothesize beyond the limiting constraints of our non-fictitious objective true ontology. Given some locality whose value is not equal to zero, we can define somewhere. Given some temporality whose values is not equal to zero, we can define some when. As objective, real physical property of our knowable universe which cannot undergo a transformation in state, making their nature as a phenomenon equal to zero. The quality of nothing is not knowable, nor can it be experienced or measured objectively. Nothing is a quality of state of being where all quantitative empirical values equals zero. Given some locality and a temporality whose value is not equal to zero but is positive or negative, we objectively define something and some time, even if these values are abstracted as being negative quantity. A negative space has an inverse behavior. A positive volume can be said to inflate and expand. A negative space experiencing inflation would have an observable inverse behavior and would be said to contract as a byproduct of expansion. If a positive inflation and a negative inflation were to interact, you will get a static movement, but the empirical ground state would measure plus divided by -1, not 0. This is something. By its nature, it is impossible to measure zero locality and zero temporality, thus making nothingness as an empirical knowable ontological state intrinsically unknowable beyond reasoning and comprehension. Furthermore, if we have some encompassing volume of locality and temporality, within we can describe influences, forces, laws, and constants which give rise to corporeal and incorporeal entities. These entities may have nature which transcends the existence of the encompassing volume within which they are present. Given some influences, forces, laws, and constants whose empirical values are plus divided by minus, while never being equal to zero, we can say that there is something which exists inside the encompassing locality and temporality. Given the same influences, forces, laws, and constants whose empirical values are equal to zero, we can say that they are nothing, as that which is encompassed by locality and temporality are an aspect of the locality and temporality, but the existence of the locality and temporality does not have an existence dependent upon its contents. We can empty all influences, forces, laws, and constants from the locality and temporality, and it will have nothing within its encompassing threshold, while itself still having a presence not equal to zero. For the longest of time, I have been abstracting that existence is inside of non-existence. While contradictory, this claim is logically sound. A circle is a line drawn parallel to a point. A sphere is a plane drawn parallel to a point. A globe is a cube drawn parallel to a point. A hypersphere is a tesseract drawn parallel to a point. For the last few years, this assertion has been super strong. and without contradiction, until I discovered a theory that postulates that our universe came from nothing. First, virtual particles are allowed to violate the known laws of physics until we reason that the vacuum state gives rise to the aggregate of what we define as elementary particles. When the perfect vacuum state of the universe can be perceived as boiling like a pot of water, we realize that particles are the high energy bubbles that fall within the low energy vacuum as a byproduct of thermodynamic forces trying to equalize. The instability of our universe ground vacuum state is what gives rise to this observation. With this understanding perceive the object truth is valid and realize that it's the subjective bias premise that is in error. A universe from nothing is a falsehood. At best, virtual particles converse the vacuum energy state. Where they exist is a higher energy state encompassed by a lower energy state. Locality. If we state that a virtual particle is a higher energy state contrast against a lower encompassing energy state, what we find is that we can define locality as an encompassing zero-dimensional state. If defined as a number line, locality would be located at 0. Now, originally this point would be the outer extremity opposite the center of a circle. Everything here within the circle would be defined as existence, and everything outside this circle will be defined as non-existence. This time in the form of negative energy. Negative energy is stated as being equal and opposite positive energy. Virtual particles are said to come into existence as positive and negative energy fluctuations. Our universe is said to have infinite positive energy and infinite negative energy. Together, the total energy state of the universe equals 0. But as the universe is described as being uneven, this lack of uniformity is what gives rise to the physical composition of distribution of the cosmos. If we go back to our model of the locality, we have defined a circumference of a circle parallel to a point at its center. This point is infinity and allegory to everything that exists. The circumference is defined as 0 and represents no dimensions. Everything outside this circle is also 0 relative to the circle. Where then do negative number exist? Where then do negative number exist? The center value of the circle has been defined using a single all-inclusive infinite set. It is contradictory to simply state that the infinite negative set exists as equal to the positive set. If both sets are present within the same infinity volume, then the entire system collapses into a zero ground state. This is where the manifold comes in. A manifold is a topological space that can be defined as having no boundaries. Its interior and exterior are one and the same. This is its simplified allegoric nature. Manifolds are objectively true. They can be illustrated and fabricated within our objective reality. Their nature can be objectively abstracted and thus known. A manifold drawn parallel to a point perfectly analogizes infinite indefinity and the lowest ground state of the locality. If we open up a manifold, we get a number line. To one side of the number line, we describe the positive set. This is the ascendant. At the opposite side of the number line, we describe the negative set. This is the descendant. We mark each set of numbers 0 to 9. For the ascendant, we mark 0 to +9. And for the descendant, we mark 0 to -9. To conserve the cardinality of the locality, we then label each set so that the positive and negative number are inverse from each other. +1 and -9, +2 and -8, +3 and -7, +4 and -6, +5 and -5, etc. Now we twist one side of the number line, spinning it along its length 180 degrees. This converts the number line into a manifold. We then draw the manifold parallel to a point, giving rise to a mathematical model of a true universe from nothing. We then draw the manifold parallel to a point, giving rise to a mathematical model of a true universe from nothing, where all non-existence is encompassed by existence. This is the foundation of the locality. Every point is a ground state locality. Like virtual particles, these points can manifest into being. Their energy states move away from the manifold. If they are ascendant, they will move into a positive direction. If they are descendant, they will move into the negative direction. Once they reach the highest point of their energy state, they come into being. As they lose energy, they descend back toward the manifold ground state, returning to a locality of zero in the process. The absolute ground state is momentum. The absolute lowest ground state is momentum. Nothing is the unknowable aggregates which give rise to the intrinsic property of the ontological locality. In this context, nothing or nothingness is ontologically unintelligible, incomprehensible, indiscernible, meaningless, unfathomable, obscure, cryptic, inscrutable, enigmatic, mumbled, insistent, inarticulate, incoherent, illegible, indecipherable, unimaginable, and irreconcilable. If we close our eyes for a thought experience and try to imagine something which is beyond our comprehension, the acting of itself is irreconcilable. At best, we can come to a sapient approximation for myself, and speaking in this context from my own personal viewpoint. When I attempt to perceive something which is beyond my own comprehension, my mind creates the presence of some complex form, but it is beyond my senses of perception. It is knowable but not observable. My mind generates the darkest darkness, where within the knowable, unobservable form resides. Because of this, I am of the mind that darkness is the omnipresent, natural state of unknown and undefined. When we look up into the night sky, there is a lot of information in the form of electromagnetic radiation that we should be able to see, but our minds only detect and decode the visible light spectrum. The rest of the electromagnetic spectrum, to include the gravitational spectrum, is beyond our limited perspective. Due to this, the universe is dominated by the ubiquity of darkness. Darkness is the closest natural state of nothingness that can be objectively observed and directly experienced by human. Darkness is the result of there being no visible light present. Entropy is a loss of order and a return to chaos and uncertainty. With regards to the locality, we can state plainly that zero dimensions is the same as a state of having dimension which cannot be understood. The closer any given state of the locality gets to zero, the more disordered and uncertain its causality becomes. This entropy is the ground state of locality, which is defined as 1. At a ground state of 0.99 and below, we describe the threshold of zero dimensions. At a state of 0.0, we have reached absolute nothingness. If the forces of entropy is highly sufficient, the ground state might cross the ascendant threshold and begin to descend toward a negative ground state. At an above -1, 0, we have reached the ceiling of the descendant state. Like with the ascendant state, a ground state of -0.99 and above is described as a threshold of zero dimensions. If we describe a point within the locality with a ground state of 1, we define something which has 1 dimensions. If we imagine a point within the locality with a ground state of 0.99, we define nothingness to have 0 dimensions. Order is the loss of disorder and the return to orderliness and certainty. It is hard to define the locality. In essence, it is the state of facts of existing, occurring, or being present within a place or thing. As mentioned before, nothingness is a state of indefinity. Contrast against the locality, which is the foundation where within things occupy or are comprised. The locality is the relativistic medium where within matter and energy exist and interact. The present state of the observable universe implies as a constant a universe expansion where all points within the locality are moving away from other points within the locality. While this observation is based on spatial locality, its duration is also an aspect of the temporal as well. By reversing the location of all points in present space backward through time, we arrive at a singular moment in the past where all points within the locality have an origin which is best described as having infinite density. These earliest points in our universe abstracted in history causes a breakdown of our understanding of the fundamental forces which drive our knowable observable universe. It is theorized that the fundamental forces which govern the singularity of our early universe changed, resulting in the Big Bang, giving rise to our knowable universe. As stated, 0.0 implies nothing, but less than 1 is quantifiably equal to 0, while not being anything in much the same way that 0.99 is approximately 1.0 without actually being 1.0. Imagine, if you will, a line AB. At some point on this line, AB defines a point of 0.0. This point is nothingness. To the left of this point, define a point which is minus 0.99, and to the right of this point, define a second point, 0.99. Given line segment A has ordinarity, if any given point of AB were to change their values, then all associated cardinality would also change as a result. If the cardinality of 0.99 changed to 0.98, then all other cardinality would have to change so that ordinality of line segment AB would remain constant. Because of this, 0.0 would change from nothing to something, and its closest infinitesimal neighbor cardinality would also change from something to nothing. If we treat line segment A as an isolate system, we also change. If we treat line segment AB as an isolate system, we can state that its cardinality and its ordinality is a thermodynamic system subject to the forces of entropy. As any given cardinality loses energy or gains energy, the whole system gains or loses energy as well. Location A of the segment is equal to minus 0.99, and location B of the segment is equal to 0.99. From these derivatives, a finite number of cardinality where within as a whole we describe as thermodynamic system. If location A and location B loses energy and the system remains conserved, every cardinality would shift its energy from the center outward. To conserve ordinality of line segment AB, the values will remain the same, but their quantities which separate distances between them would be further apart due to less energy being present in the system. In other words, the locality would be less dense. The expansion of the early universe is abstracted as some internal gravitation force of attraction which is holding everything together. Whereas, taken as a cosmic whole, the pressure of an unbound region of space's higher vacuum energy could have pushed all the early physical matter and energy of our universe into a single dense point. When the external boundary of our universe underwent a change in its ground state energy, our universe experienced negative existential pressure and thus expanded. The fundamental forces operation on the quantum scale require the tiniest degrees of change to describe macroscopic changes to the nature phenomena of the physical world. This line of reasoning, which is illustrated with a single 1D line, can be abstracted into an infinite number of dimensions. I have always reasoned that our 3D directly observable universe is expanding into 4D of locality space and 1D of temporality, also known as time. The mechanics of our universe is 4D space and 1D time. My assertion is that the locality of our universe is defined as WXYZ. Cartesian coordinates gravity. Cartesian coordinates gravity is a dualistic force of attraction and repulsion, akin to what we observe in electromagnetism. However, gravity operates in the YZ coordinates our universe. To us, the Z coordinate is unobservably unknowable, so we perceive gravity as only a force of mass attraction. To put it in another way, a magnet has an attraction and repulsion field which act through 3D WXY, but we observe it as a 2D spin state clockwise or counterclockwise. I theorize like gravity in the inverse aspect of universe parallel to us. Mass attraction is more dominant with electromagnetism operating as a monopolar force. My 2 cents double square law. Every system is derived from work. As a mechanic of regress, every system requires more work than the previous system until the whole system requires more work than the total system has. This is due to the inverse square law which governs mechanics and dynamics. Any two forces have strengths which are equal to the inverse of the distance between them. What this implies is that the force which operates between points in a system is equal to a factor which is relative to the distance between the points. As the distance between points decreases, the factor of the force increases. From this relationship, an external force acting on a system which causes the system to move toward a common center also causes the forces acting between them to increase inversely by the distance. If an internal force was required to push the system back apart, it would require more energy to force all points back to their original position that was initially required to put the system into motion to begin with. My 2 cent double square law states the allegorical magnitude of the intrinsic force between 2 points doubles per 10 units of the distance between them. If the magnitude is attractive, the force between 2 points charge increases as the distance between them gets smaller. If the magnitude is repulsive, the force between 2 point charges decrease as the distance between them gets larger. As an analogy, the double square laws is intended to help with the abstraction of how entropy behaves empirically. The use of the description of entropy as order moving toward disorder is both inaccurate and misleading. The best example of what is implied by entropy is the why you can't burn the ashes from coal. You can burn coal and extract heat energy from it, but you can't collect the ash and burn the ash and get the same quality of energy from it that you originally got from the initial burning of coal. Stellar nucleosynthesis is said to occur with a net gain of energy. As chemical elements are transmitted in the core of stars, the process is described as producing more energy than is used in the process of forming heavier and more complex chemical elements until it reaches iron. Like with coal, the process of transmutation iron through stellar nucleosynthesis uses consume more energy than the star get back from the process. In essence, iron and the chemical elements beyond iron on the periodic table of elements are stellar nucleosynthesis ash. They are the remains of a process that is subject to the forces of entropy. I'm sure yet still, this is all allegorical and hasn't really expressed a clear explanation to the thermodynamic nature of entropy, which is very important in redefining the nature of nothingness. To do this, I'll be using the double square law disclaimer. However, the term square implies a quantity which has been divided into 10 units, instead of a number times its self-definition, which is commonplace. Imagine, if you will, a single intrinsic point charge generating an allegorical force across some distance. From this point, define an array of infinite distance and infinite scale. Label the point with a Cartesian coordinate as 0. Label the arrow traveling away from the point as infinity. Starting from the point which has been labeled 0, draw a second point. Label this point 1. Starting from 1, moving away from 0, still on the line, moving a distance equal to the distance from 0 to 1. Label a point 2. Continue this process into infinity. This is our framework. It is at every point the distance is equal. The distance from 0 to 1 is equal to the distance from 1 to 2. Returning back to the intrinsic point charge, we must give it some value to start with. The distance from 0 to 1 is equal to the distance from 1 to 2. Returning back to the intrinsic point charge, we must give it some value to start with. We give it a value of 1. At location 0, the magnitude of the intrinsic point charge is 1. At location 1, the magnitude of the intrinsic point charge is 2. At location 2, the magnitude of the intrinsic point charge is 4. At location 3, the magnitude of the intrinsic point charge is 8. At location 4, the magnitude of the intrinsic point charge is 16. At location 5, the magnitude of the intrinsic point charge is 32. At location 6, the magnitude of the intrinsic point charge is 64. At location 7, the magnitude of the intrinsic point charge is 128. At location 8, the magnitude of the intrinsic point charge is 256. At location 9, the magnitude of the intrinsic point charge is 512. We have defined the magnitude of the intrinsic point charge, but we have not given it any kind of orientation. To orientate the intrinsic charge, we can use these values of attraction or repulsion. Starting at location 0, we can state that the force attraction has a magnitude of 512, and the magnitude of its strength will decrease by half, equal to the square of the distance. At location 0, the magnitude of the intrinsic point charge is 512. At location 1, the magnitude of the intrinsic point charge is 256. At location 2, the magnitude of the intrinsic point charge is 128. At location 3, the magnitude of the intrinsic point charge is 64. At location 4, the magnitude of the intrinsic point charge is 32. At location 5, the magnitude of the intrinsic point charge is 16. At location 6, the magnitude of the intrinsic point charge is 8. At location 7, the magnitude of the intrinsic point charge is 4. At location 8, the magnitude of the intrinsic point charge is 2. At location 9, the magnitude of the intrinsic point charge is 1. At any location, any other intrinsic charge will experience a force equal to the magnitude at that location. At location 5, an intrinsic charge will experience an attractive force equal to 16. This attractive force will cause the intrinsic charge at location 5 to move to location 4. When the intrinsic charge arrives at location 4, it will experience a magnitude force of 32 between location 5.0 and 4.1. The intrinsic charge experiences a constant magnitudinal force of 16. Using this analogy, we can now understand the nature of entropy. Currently, we have an intrinsic charge A at location 0 generating a magnitudinal force of attraction. We have an intrinsic charge B starting at location 5 being influenced by charge A at location 0. Charge B is moving with a magnitude of 16 from location 5 toward location 4. Once charge B crosses the threshold of location 4 from 5, it will experience a magnitude force of 32 instead of 16. At location 5, charge B experiences a force of 16. At location 4, charge B experiences a force of 32. This is entropy. So what do I mean? An object at rest stays at rest. An object in motion stays in motion. An object which has momentum has a vector which gives it direction. As stated before, forces of attraction and forces of repulsion have direction associated with their influences. This is important to remember when we state the entropy is the property of nature to become more disordered. Two forces of attraction move toward each other until they come into contact. Two forces of repulsion move away from each other until they are beyond each other's influences. This is the true function of entropy. When two attractive charges reach maximum entropy, they are touching or in physical contact with each other. If we go back to the original thought experiment of the charge B at location 4 with a strength of 36 acting upon it, to move this charge back against the attractive force moving it toward charge A at location 0 would require a force greater than 32 to overcome its current attractive force. Yet the initial force required to move charge B at location 4 was only 16. Likewise, at location 16, to move the charge to location 3 would require a force greater than 16. Yet, if charge B was located at location 3, its magnitudinal force would only be 8. It's hard to explain, but basically, it takes more energy to return a body to its origin than it does to initially set a body into motion. Perhaps this is the nature of inertia when a body is at rest. This quality is entropy. It takes less energy to chemically combine oxygen and hydrogen than the electrolysis required to separate water back into hydrogen and oxygen. This is why water is not flammable. It is the ash from oxidizing hydrogen and oxygen together.